The Energy Minister, Fergus Ewing, whom we heard from earlier, says that only independence will enable Scotland to release its full energy-producing potential. He's off to Norway for a couple of days, where he's going to be talking and having discussions with the Norwegians about the possibility of cooperation. And indeed, he spoke about long-term investment funds in an independent Scotland from profits of oil and gas reserves. In the course of his interview, he said that we could learn from Norway about how they had handled their oil fund.
Norway does provide an excellent example of how a country can steward its resources. They established their fund in 1990 and they made no contributions into it for, I think, roughly 6 years of any size. But now the fund is the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world, worth around 470 billion pounds. Now, of course, we're not saying that this is something that Scotland could achieve in a short period, nor has Norway. The point is that they proceeded with care, slowly. They contributed to this fund as resources permitted. In the years where there were substantial, massive revenues from oil and gas, which frankly could not be used in any event for current expenditure, they put it aside. Now, Britain is one of the few countries in the world, along with Iraq, that didn't do likewise.
That's Fergus Ewing, the Energy Minister, who's off to Norway and who was speaking to us earlier. And we're joined now by Labour's Shadow UK Energy Minister, Tom Greatrex MP, who's in our Westminster studio. Good morning.
Good morning.
Looking at the history, Fergus Ewing's right, isn't he, that there was a massive missed opportunity by successive UK governments?
Well, what Fergus Ewing is right about is that, quoting the period from 1990, that during that period, by his advisor's own figures, there's been only 1 year when in Scotland, if you make the most generous allocation of geographical shares of North Sea oil and gas revenues, that Scotland would have been in surplus. So the difference with Norway, and I think sometimes these comparisons are a bit facile, but as resources permitted were the words that Fergus Ewing used, that in that situation in Scotland, we wouldn't have been able to have an oil fund with any wealth in it from that period that he was talking about. And the fact that there was 1 year when there was a surplus, I think, underlines the second most significant point about this, which is the inherent volatility in oil and gas revenues, and which is has been demonstrated over the last few years when you've seen during the course of the last 5 years that the barrel price per oil fall to $70 and then rise to 130 within the space of a few months and then back down again to around 100. So it's hugely volatile, and so the idea of basing the significant amount of your economy on that resource is something which I think people in Scotland should be concerned about in the context of decisions they'll make next September. Later in this year.
That's a slightly different point. The volatility underlying all economic activity. Just on the oil fund point, though, Fergus Ewing was at pains, I thought, I was struck by this, to say, look, nobody is suggesting it's easy. No one is suggesting it could happen instantly. I mean, it struck me that he was being very cautious about it and saying, look, you know, we, the Scottish Government, cannot be accused of just saying, you know, independence one day, massive oil fund the next. And you shouldn't actually put up that straw man, because in fact now they're not saying that.
Well, what I'm talking about is a 20-year period that he's referring to, back to 1990 when Norway started their oil fund. There's been 1 year of potential surplus out of, and all the others has been a deficit. So, you know, in terms of this point about as resources allowing, the resources in a Scottish context wouldn't have allowed that to happen, no matter which government or on which constitutional arrangement we were talking about during that period.
But you see, if you're talking to a Scottish audience, a lot of people will be sitting at home saying, listen, if we in Scotland had control over this, then accepting the point about volatility, which any sensible person accepts is part of the equation, nonetheless, there would be freedom to decide what to do with these revenues, which from time to time might be quite big. Now, putting it no higher than that, you've got to come up with a reason why handling the oil revenues on a UK basis is better for people in Scotland than the other way around.
And the fundamental reason why it's better for the resources to be pooled and the risk to be pooled and to be shared is that volatility. Because from year to year, if a significant proportion of your economy, up to about a fifth of your economy, is based on oil and gas revenues, and we've seen in the recent past the inherent volatility in that and the significant price fluctuations that derive what revenue you get from it as a state, then the best way of doing that is to make sure that it's in with a broader basket within the wider economy. And I think that's the inherent reason about why it's better for the UK as a whole to have stewardship of oil revenues along with every other aspect of economic activity.
Tom Greatrex, Labour's UK energy spokesman, thanks very much.